All right, so let's talk a little bit about hands. These guys. The most important part of your hand is going to be the flat of it. All right, this is what hinges onto your wrist and moves around in space. Whatever your fingers do, they only get there because the flat of your hand pointed them there. Now, the great thing about the flat of the hand is that it's a familiar shape, and a familiar shape that's pretty easy to draw in various perspectives. Okay, and that's going to be a trapezoid. So the knuckles are the widest part of the trapezoid, and the wrist is the narrow part. But your hand also has a thickness to it, right? It's got a width, it's wide, but it's also thick. Now that thickness is also a trapezoid, but it goes in the opposite direction. So it's narrow at the knuckles and wider at the wrist. Now, if you take your hand and you just kind of relax it or even stretch it out a bit, what you'll find is, looking at the trapezoid of the flat of it, your index finger and your pinky kind of want to just follow the lines of that trapezoid. And oftentimes you'll have a temptation to draw fingers like they're hot dogs or sausages. And my recommendation is to think of them more like big flat cut French fries, because it reinforces to you that, like your hand, which has a top and a side, your fingers also have a top and a side and a bottom. That there are these planes here that make it easier to visualize how they move anatomically and how they catch light as three-dimensional objects. So, looking at the length, we want to think of your fingers as they're really not much longer or shorter than the flat of your hand. So if we give us an index finger, now aside from just eyeballing, right, to say like, well, that seems about the right thickness for a finger. The thing is, we've got 4 fingers that need to cut across here, so that's some pretty simple math going on. So if that's the index finger, and it's about the width of the flat of the hand, and that's the pinky, and it's going to be, the shortest of these guys, then our middle finger can come up and be taller than the index finger, and our ring finger is probably about the same height as the pointer, as the index finger. Now, the knuckles of your fingers don't split up in quite an even thirds. That first knuckle is a little further than a third of the way, but not quite halfway. And that allows you for that shorter fingertip after that next knuckle. And then there are these knuckles, which sort of round knobs, but we could think of them as being almost more diamond shaped as far as figuring out how light is going to hit them. Now, if you tap, you'll feel the bone right under the surface. That goes if you're a lean person or if you've got like chubby baby hands. Not that you're babies with baby hands, but if hypothetically you had little chubby baby hands, that knuckle would still be right under the surface, but instead of being raised, it would appear as a dimple. There would be a dent there. Now, so that gets us the knuckles and the fingers. Our fingernails kind of sit in here. Like so. And the thumb, that last guy, the thumb hangs out on a triangle that swings around. So if we drag that triangle down, starting at the base of the hand, what happens in here is actually a finger. But this length happens back in the meat of the hand and then your thumb swings out on that. The tip of the thumb is sort of kind of shovel shaped. If you picture it as having this kind of scoop to it and a flat, so somewhere between a spoon and a shovel. The tips of all your fingers have a little bit of that, and when we look at the hand from different angles, you see where that's a useful form to visualize. Now, the way the hand connects to the arm at the wrist, one of the more important shapes that happens there on the back of the hand is the ulna. Now, the ulna is, if you feel like the knuckles, the ulna comes right up to the surface. It's this little knob here. And it is also the knob that happens on the inside of your elbow. So there's a bone that crosses this way, and that's the ulna, and then there's a bone that crosses this way, and that's your radius. On the outside of the arm, wherever your pinky is, you get a kind of gentle swoosh. Maybe a slight bit of S-curve, but it's one gentle swoosh back to where the elbow is. On the thumb side, you more often have a little bit of a double curve. All right, and that's brought up because the bone, your radius, is right under the surface here. And then the muscles of your arm sort of take over and fill in this space where the crisscross happens. So one of the reasons I keep making a big deal about the thickness, right, of your hand and your fingers, to picture them, like I said, as sort of flat-cut French fries more than hot dogs, is if we visualize light coming down, it'll help us see this as more than just that flat shape that you might trace in first grade to make a Thanksgiving turkey or an autumn leaf. But if we can visualize a light source somewhere around here, I like to do little imaginary light bulbs for that. But that's a situation where we can visualize the border, the contour, where the side meets the top. And look at your own hands. They're the easiest thing to reference because you've got them. This is the point of teaching you this and going over this, is not to draw hands without reference, but to look at your reference and have an idea of what you're looking at and what you're looking for so that you can make sense of it. As you think about your hand compositionally, this is a way to look for the three-dimensional forms that'll happen. So we're going to see the side of the hand here. We can decide how much we want this thumb to swing up and catch light or how much we want it to descend. And then we come back here to the wrist, and we can see where the side of the arm gives way to the top of the arm. Maybe even catch a little shadow on the ulna. And if we're going to do that, we'll probably catch a little more on these knuckles here. All right? And let the thumb come back up and catch a little light there. All right? But by hugging these contours, by thinking about the three-dimensional shape as in a sort of cross-section way, now we can go ahead and start thinking about our shadow as a design as well. That we're not just starting from the edge and going from dark to light and hoping for the best and hoping that we'll know when to stop. We're giving the shadow sort of a goal. We're telling it where the plane changes. And that gives us the benefit of, one, not being distracted by any oddities in the shape of the hand, right? Because when you're looking at a 3/4 view of something, right, that side view and top view at the same time, sometimes things can sort of seem out of proportion if we don't remember that we're seeing multiple sides at once. So this allows us to, break that phenomenon down but it also gives us twice as many shapes in our composition. All right, and then this is when we can go in and, again, looking at your reference or your own hand or both, go ahead and start just refining your shapes and finding more specifics that go on the outside, more specifics to the contour, and by that I mean contour as edge, contour as three-dimensional shape. The reason we call contour lines actually is to differentiate them from outlines, to remind ourselves that this seeming outline that we're drawing is actually an edge of a three-dimensional object, that we're using line to give a visible character to a three-dimensional shape with edges. So that is one example of a hand. If we move our pad over a little more, we can start thinking about what that hand looks like in 3 dimensions. So let's say we want the hand coming toward us, right? Because we know it's made of trapezoids, we can think of how to foreshorten that shape. Now that trapezoid can either be completely flat, it can actually get a little arch to it, right? So if we want to build that in, right, its contour doesn't change at the wrist, but our fingers can arch this way. So we take those trapezoids and we can divide this space up and say index finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky. I'm going to start with the index finger and thinking about it again in that kind of flat cut French fry proportion, or flat cut French fry dimension. I'm going to pull that first knuckle up, kind of fold it there. And then what I was saying about the thumb being a sort of kind of a scoop, like a spoon or a shovel. We can visualize it coming up that way. Now, if we figure out where that sort of like knobby diamond of a knuckle is, that is what we can latch our middle finger onto and have it come out, again, thinking in flat cut French fry dimensions. And that slight shovel of the tip of the finger. All right, but to remember that we're looking at the side and the top at the same time. When we get to the ring finger, I decide to even just kind of close that guy down even further, not quite into a fist, but on the way there. And let the pinky actually do the rest of it. Just close all the way in. All right, you see there's that kind of crow's foot that forms coming out of here as it folds in on itself. But remember that there's a side and a top to that finger. All right, and then helps to look and just see where the folds happen on the side of the hand too. Again, all of these tricks are there not to so much draw a hand out of your head, but to help you know what you're looking at or looking for when you look at a hand or look at reference, from which we can go in and kind of refine these contours a bit. And I can decide what the thumb's doing. So if the thumb is pushed back, there's this little kind of football shape of muscle tissue that kind of bumps up there. But I think I want it to pull forward. So I'm going to visualize that that triangle is cutting down this way, maybe out to the side. And then I'm just going to see like that much of the thumb back here. And if we scrounge up an eraser, and pull out some of these guidelines that are going on in here. Now we can start thinking a little bit more in terms of lighting design like we did over here. So let's say I wanted this light to come from somewhere back here. So the pinky knuckle, right, is facing, the top of the pinky is facing away from it. But wherever this light goes, it's going to sort of bounce back from the surroundings. So we can allow a little bit of reflected light on this plane change, and a little bit of reflected light as we get out from, right, the shadow edge of the hand, and then where the environment informs it with some reflected light. And we want to think about the way this knuckle is going to grab light too. Same here. We can decide at what point this corner turns. A way to think about those three-dimensional forms that we're all used to and kind of don't even know it is, you know, the way the phases of the moon work, right? That if that's the moon and the sun is coming at it from over here, we get, you know, a not quite full moon. I guess that's a gibbous, right? But what that is really a crescent of shadow. And as that crescent of shadow works its way around that three-dimensional form, we get different phases until we move across and the sun is back behind it on this side. But picturing how this halo of light goes from its broadest to its narrowest as it wraps around this round shape is how we can think about where the light crests on the dimensions of this knuckle. Catch some reflected light over here, but not quite as much as on the fingertip, because the fingertip is on the same plane as this. Okay, now the top of the middle finger is going to catch light, but not this side of it. And then as it turns this way, the light might cascade across it a little bit, or it might pick up more reflected light, but it's not going to be a bright highlight. And then where this tip turns, it's going to catch the least amount of light on that finger. And again, we can decide if we want to catch it as a gibbous or as a crescent. And much of the same kind of goes for the index finger, though. We want to think of how reflected light is going to react with it as we turn this corner on our wedge cut French fry. All right, and see the side of it in more shadow than the top that catches all the light, and the tip of it that faces away. And then the thumb will catch a little halo of light up top, but the bulk of it will be in shadow. And from where we're sitting, it's probably even shielded from some of that reflected light by the rest of the hand. That as light bounces up here from where we're sitting, the hand will sort of block the glare of it for us. All right, and then once again, our ulna is kind of up here. The rest of the wrist, we've got that sense of a double curve coming out from the thumb, and that single swoosh coming down on the ulna side. All right, and then going, looking from your reference, now we can start to think about, additional modeling happening within the light. But we only got that far because we could make these larger decisions based upon these plane changes, based upon trapezoids and those phases of the moon here.